This week in Georgia, voter advocacy groups filed a lawsuit alleging nearly 200,000 voters have been wrongly purged from the registration list before the 2020 election, and it primarily affected voters of color. These groups are asking a federal court to compel Georgia to restore these names to the list ahead of the January Senate runoffs, which will ultimately determine Washington's balance of power. Voters have to register by Monday to vote in those runoffs. With me now, Rosario Dawson. She is an artist, designer, and activist. Also with me, Greg Palast. He's a New York Times bestselling author and investigative journalist. His latest book, How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters, is out now. Your investigative reporting found over 190,000 voters illegally removed from rolls prior to the November election. How did this happen?
Well, and that report was issued by the ACLU that I wrote. And what happened was that they said almost 200,000 people had fled Georgia or left Atlanta. Now, if you don't live in Georgia, you can't vote in Georgia. But we found out that these 198,000 people on that list had never moved at all, had never left Atlanta or Georgia. As you say, many voters of color, including, by the way, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. I was actually at the polls when she was thrown out from the place she'd voted at for 50 years. She hadn't moved from her home in 6 decades. These are the people that are being thrown out. And so now what is shaping up to be actually the biggest voting rights case of the decade, a group of the top voting rights lawyers in the country with Black Voters Matter, with Operation Rainbow Push, the Reverend Jackson. And we've just learned a few minutes ago, we're being joined by the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project, the big Latinx group, which is, by the way, frantically calling 26,000 Hispanics on the list to say, you've got to re-register. You've lost your vote unless you re-register by Monday night. And of course, we've also put up a gigantic electronic billboard with the lovely masked face of Rosario Dawson reminding people to check their registration, make sure they are not purged. That's a term that they use for just wiping the voters off the voter rolls. Thank you.
Rosario, it is not lost on me, and
thank you, Greg.
And I'm sure it is not lost on you, Rosario, that you have sort of this split screen where you have the president crying about disenfranchisement that didn't actually happen, and then you have real disenfranchisement happening in Georgia. The ACLU says those impacted are young voters, voters of lower income, and voters of color. I mean, what do you make of the groups that have been targeted by this purge?
I mean, I think it's about they're targeting groups that are, help very responsible for turning the state blue. And what they want to do is make sure that they don't get to vote and therefore potentially change the Senate. And that's what's at stake. I was just in Georgia. That's why I was masked doing the interview, because I was there with GLAR and Casa en Action and Mi Gente and Song Power. They've already knocked on 21,000 doors. They're trying to get the vote to turn out. And these are people who potentially have already registered and might actually be purged, and will show up or try to get their absentee ballot and not be able to get that. And, what you were just talking about earlier with climate change, this is what's at stake. Biden's plan actually has a lot of teeth in it when it comes to the environment. He sat down with groups like Sunrise Movement, and Jay Inslee has said it's about 85% of what he would have wished for from a climate change legislation, and we have the possibility of pushing that forward if we take the Senate Majority leadership away from Mitch McConnell, who's already been sitting on bipartisan legislation that has been passed since 2018 during the midterms, when there was also record turnout of people of color and young people, and which transformed Congress into getting us First Native people, lots of women in Congress, and so we have progressive measures that can actually move forward. Otherwise, we're going to have the Grim Reaper, as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell calls himself, who's going to be just doing straight obstructionism and preventing this presidency from this upcoming presidency from having any big wins, so that it can be taken away from them the next midterms and beyond. So we have a lot at stake. If we don't have the voter turnout that we're expecting. The president is in Georgia right now, specifically trying to make sure that just because he's not on the ticket, that people will still show up for the Republican candidates. And we have to keep championing people to warnock their off-offs and make sure that they are registered. There's a few turn 18 by January 5th. You're allowed to register to vote in this election. And we only have until Monday to get these folks. That's 198,000 people who've been purged from the voter rolls to make sure that they're allowed to vote in this election. And so, I have a voting organization. What we do is voter registration. We registered over 1 million people. It would be devastating if the people that we had registered had been turned away from the polls after the work that it takes to actually get people to get engaged and involved.
Rosario, not a lot of people can get away with that play on words, but I'm going to give it to you because you were able to pull it off. I mean, Greg, you have President Trump calling on the governor of the state to ask for a special session of the state legislature. I mean, you were talking about big dynamic power structures in place. The president is asking to be leveraged in his favor. What does that say to you about the stakes of this race?
Everything is at stake. Okay, Trump wants the state legislature to overturn the will of the voters. And so the Republican leaders have basically thrown him under the bus because they have to save their Senate seats. That's everything to them. And unfortunately, look, I'm not partisan on this. Let's let the voters pick who the Senate, who should control the Senate. The problem is that they've removed 198,000 voters illegally. We have to get them back on. They've been talking about fantasy fraud. They haven't found where are these fraudulent voters coming in from out of state? Where are these illegal voters swimming the Rio Grande to vote just because your last name is Garcia? That's one of the problems. They've been picking out common names: Rodriguez, Garcia, Jones, Black, Johnson, Kim, and identifying those voters and saying they've moved because they found believe it or not, a Jose Garcia in another state. Well, golly, yeah, it's not a common name for a Republican, but these are the games that they're playing. We have to get these voters back on. And by the way, if we win this case, we're going to be crushing. This legal team is ready to crush these vote suppression techniques that were first tried in Georgia that they're trying to take around the country. And we're going to stop it here. This is a big case, and we're going to have a federal court hearing, by the way. The courts have accepted the case, which is amazing. They're ready to hear the injunction. And the Republican officials have hired the biggest law firms in the nation. They are in full panic. We're going to get these people back on.
Rosario and Greg, thank you both so much.